Freedom Finders. I'd like to just ask you to think of your age right now. If you're closer to your if you just recently had your birthday, round down. If you're closer to your next birthday, round up. So I'm 54. And now I want you to add 30 years. And if you feel like in 30 years you might be on the other side of the veil, let's just let that go for a minute. So just add 30 years, whatever age you are now. So for me, that would be 84. And imagine for the next 30 years until you're that age, you are in a 5x7 cell on death row with some who are innocent and some who are horrible, violent criminals. And that's how you're going to spend the next 30 years of your life. It's pretty overwhelming, isn't it? And imagine, so when I'm 84, when you're your age, we get out, and we say we're free. I mean, when we heard that reading this morning, you can feel, when I got to that place in the book, I just cried and cried and cried. He's finally, after all these years, free. The joy of it, the excitement of it, the expansiveness of it. But he spent the last 30 years in the very structured, small world that had become his home. He had to learn how to live in that day in and day out. We've also I've been referring once in a while to the movie Shawshank Redemption. I'm amazed how parallel these two journeys are. And in the story of Shawshank Redemption, there's a character named Brooks who's sort of a lifelong prisoner. That's all he remembers. He came in at a really young age, has always been in prison, and really adapted well. Everybody knew Brooks. And he's an old man by the time he's set free. He's given parole and he's let out into the world. And he's completely not ready for it. He can't adapt. There's just way too much energy, way too much choices. The world's, it's not very small and structured. It's crazy, and he feels completely lost. And he thinks about stealing something to get thrown back in prison so he could be comfortable. If we use that as a metaphor, reincarnation. I don't know. I'm not saying if there's reincarnation or not, but it's just an interesting concept. So much freedom is so hard to handle. We want to come back to what we know, to what's familiar, to a more constrained world. He decides not to do another criminal act. Instead, he chooses to take his life. That's how hard it was for him to be in that place of freedom after getting so used to and familiarized in his body, in his emotions, in his mind, in his thinking with this smaller life. Ray Hinton sort of experienced something similar. So when he left, the first night he was going to his friend Lester's house. Lester visited him every week for 30 years. Now that's true friendship. And so he went to stay with Lester for the first few nights of his freedom, and he is amazed by the softness of the bed after 30 years of being on this cot on death row, bare minimum, to suddenly be on this comfortable bed in a big room. And he has a panic attack. It's just too much for him. And this is his second panic attack since he's been let out that day. And so what he does is he goes into the bathroom, which is about the same size as a cell, and he falls asleep on the linoleum, you know what I mean. I don't know how everyone's saying it now. Well, what they're saying, what you're saying. Floor, the anxiety is stopped. This is familiar, it's small, it's confined, it's uncomfortable, but it's what he knows. He wakes up they served breakfast to the folks on death row before the regular prison population, so I think they were served, I think he said 3 a.m. Yeah, lunch was at 10 a.m. and dinner was at 2 p.m. So their whole schedule was completely different, but he kept referring back to what he knew for the past 30 years. He had to get up at 3 because that's what his body was used to getting up. And even when he didn't, he would always be thinking, well, that's what they're doing now. He'd be imagining, oh, this is what the prisoners are doing now. This is what the wardens are doing. Because that was his point of reference for 30 years. You just don't leave it suddenly. There's that transition point. He's had so much support, however, along the way, And whereas the character of Brooks in Shawshank Redemption was so fully identified with himself as the prison inmate, that's who he was, Ray Hinton always knew he was the innocent person who didn't belong in there. That's a huge difference. So though he got used to it and familiarized with this 30 years there, never once did he forget who he really was. Never once did he stop fighting for who he really was. So though he's had these difficult adjustment periods where he's not necessarily wanting everything that maybe people of this world want, because he can enjoy and adjust to freedom after 30 years in a small 5x7 cell. He does continue to go around. He speaks at every vehicle that he's offered to speak at, telling his story. His purpose is to get rid of the death penalty, because the death penalty, first of all, is wrong so much at the times, and anything that is that inaccurate and you're taking people's lives who are innocent, in essence, that's murder. So he's telling his story so that whole idea of supporting the death penalty disappears. But when he's not traveling and telling his story, he's staying at home. He's staying in Alabama. He's staying in what's familiar, but still more free than what he had before. Is freedom, this ultimate freedom, too good to be true for us now? Not just when we die and leave our body, because there's that whole aspect of when we leave our body, are we going to be ready to accept it? If for those of you who've been in the Testimony of Light book group or have read Testimony of Light, we know that the way it's described on the other side of the veil, and they have the same version in Eastern traditions, they call it the bardo. It's this in-between place where people spend a lot of time sleeping, and what they call them the healing hospitals of just adjusting to this entirely new, expansive, amazing place, because it's too hard for most people to make that transition. We've gotten so used to the earth plane existence, the smallness and the limitation of our body, human body identification. Can we know that freedom while we're here on earth? Well, what I believe is that's part of why we are here on this earth, is to know it as much as we possibly can and to create heaven on earth. I would say one of the things that for me has always been a vision that has moved me forward on my own personal journey as a human being and as a minister is the idea of heaven on earth. That's why we are here. We are here to do everything we possibly can to be heaven on earth, and we can't create heaven on earth out there if we aren't becoming heaven on earth right here, right now, in our own individual lives. And so we get to this incredibly important idea that we have to practice now for our freedom now, so as those moments come, as Richard Breaker, who was Shunryu Suzuki's, the guy who came after Shunryu Suzuki. All these words are escaping me today. Successor, thank you, whoever said that. Successor, he was saying spiritual practices don't make something happen, it makes us accident prone. That we sort of fall into it. We can start falling into it more and more because we're doing our spiritual practices. We're making ourselves available. All that practice, perspiration meets opportunity, all that kind of thing. That's what spiritual practice is. But one of the things I think that's very important to understand, and I was just reading this in Zen Mind, Beginner Mind, and we teach it in our New Thought teaching, and it's so essential on this journey of creating heaven on earth, is to know that it already exists. Shunryu Suzuki makes the point that most people don't achieve enlightenment because they're sitting to meditate to attain enlightenment. And he says, we're already starting from the wrong perspective if that's why we're meditating. Enlightenment already exists. The enlightened self already is who we are. So when we meditate, we're not meditating to get anything that we don't already have. We're meditating to reveal that which always already is. That we always are already that enlightened self. And if we just change the word from enlightenment to free, that we are all completely, ultimately, unlimitedly free. That we don't meditate to become free, we are already free, and we meditate to remember that freedom. Now, what happens with people, we were talking about meditation in our class last week, we can tend to say it's good meditation or bad meditation. And I think that just becomes a way where we talk ourselves out of meditating. I have monkey mind all the time. I can't calm my mind down. I don't know any spiritual teacher who doesn't have monkey mind. We all think, I think that's why they create the monastic world, is to get away from as much stimulation as possible, and even they have their mind going, but we're in the world. We're constantly stimulated. To think that our mind is not going to respond to all this stimulation that's happening in our life, individually, collectively, culturally, and so therefore we're bad meditators, and we're good meditators if we can still our mind. What Shunryu Suzuki is so clear on, and it's definitely been my experience over the years that I've really gotten this, just the fact that you're aware that you have monkey mind says the meditation's working. Because what is it that's aware when your mind is busy? What is it that is aware when your mind is still? It actually, the beingness of our always already enlightened self is already enlightened. It doesn't need to achieve any state. It's already at that state. And it's watching itself as us go through these different states of stillness, of bliss, of thinking, of planning, of desiring, of fantasizing, of bliss, of stillness. It's just watching all these states come and go. Ones that we might call spiritual, ones that we might call human. But the always already enlightened self is witnessing all of it. It's free from all of it. And every time we sit and meditate, we are remembering to remember that that place within us already exists. So when we meditate that it's already done, that we're already free. We're not waiting for anything to change, not just externally, but internally. My mind has to be quiet in order for me to meditate. I have to think this or feel this or experience this in order for me to know my always already enlightened self. I don't have to do anything. It already exists. I love the point that Ken Wilber points about non-duality, which is what our teaching is. There's no separation. There's no subject-object. Is that it's so natural that we don't even know it's there sometimes. We can't describe it. When we have a mystical experience, what I would describe mystical experience, light swirling, energies flowing through, that's still separation. You're still watching something happening. There's something to observe. It's something other than what we are. We call it non-ordinary state or mystical experience because it's a different state experience than we experience every day. Enlightenment is all of it. It's that light energy moving around, but it's also what we're experiencing every day. There's no separation ever, and it's the most natural thing. And all I know is that those moments I've experienced, it's just this subtle shift. Everything is exactly the same, but suddenly I'm just laughing in the midst of all of it. There's just this infinite bliss that accepts everything as it's arising. This is so important because if we're here about creating heaven on earth, we need to know what heaven is. And if we're always striving to have an idea in our head, an ideal in our head of what heaven is, it's so easy to constantly be falling short of it. Life is constantly not living up to our ideals, so heaven doesn't exist yet. I haven't reached heaven yet because I sit down and meditate and my mind goes crazy. So heaven doesn't exist, enlightenment doesn't exist, and so there's this constant sense of striving. In our prayer work, we had this wonderful workshop last week on prayer that was done after service. We have classes that are coming up. I know many of you have taken the classes. If you haven't, I invite you to take classes. And part of the intention of these classes is to teach this form of prayer that's so powerful. We start all of our prayers with recognizing that it all already exists, that we're not striving to get anything, that it already exists. The wholeness, the perfection, the beauty, the harmony, the creativity, the abundance, the love, the joy, the peace, all of it already exists. And that's not just a mental concept. The more we start praying on an everyday basis, regularly, in all situations and circumstances, no matter what they are, we stand in the midst of that. Shunryu Suzuki says, taking the one seat in the midst of that and start praying from that state of consciousness that the wholeness and the perfection is behind all of that, the freedom and the unlimited good, the unlimited joy, the enlightenment, the beauty already exists. And from that place, we are called to do whatever we're called to do, or speak into form through our prayer, whatever we are is needed in that moment. But we start with the always already enlightenment. And we have to start first and foremost with ourselves. It's very, very hard to create heaven on earth out there if we don't know what heaven on earth is within us. So that prayer and meditation practice makes all the difference in the world. the main character of Shawshank Redemption, Andy Dufresne, he never loses sight of who he is. He knows he's innocent. Every day, a couple weeks back, I was saying that his little rock hammer was like a mantra. He sang his mantra every day for his freedom because he knows he's not going to be able to go out of that prison system through the system. They weren't going to let him. So he had to find another way, an individual way to find freedom. So he's working his way towards freedom, always working on making the prison as best as a better place to be. But even as he's making the prison a better place to be, he's working on his own internal freedom. So when he does get that internal freedom, unlike Brooks, he adapts to it immediately because he's been in that state of consciousness the whole time. He's been in that free state of consciousness all the time. That's what we're here to do on the spiritual journey, is to every day cultivate as much as we possibly can the freedom in the midst of the constriction. Whatever is imprisoning us, whatever circumstance, relationship, condition, physical, emotional, mental, that is imprisoning us, that in the midst of that we continue to know our ultimate freedom. That even in the midst of this, whatever this is, whatever emotional challenge we're in, mental challenge, physical challenge, I am already free of it. There's a part of me that is untouched by any of this. And to start from that place and then take action. And then in creating heaven on earth, we have this whole aspect of creating heaven in our world collectively. So we have our own individual development and the collective development. I love something, it's called spiral dynamics, and it looks at this planet and its people and how we've been evolving. It calls it spiral because we're basically revisiting the same problems and challenges, but we're getting a little bit more evolved how we handle them century by century, thousands of years by thousands of years. And it tends to go in flows from working on it individually and then collectively, and then individually and then collectively. And it's very interesting to see, like most of the world's religions were created at what was called a mythic stage of development. Prior to that was a magical stage of development. Then came the rational stage of development, which is the Age of Enlightenment, which is where we moved away from sort of mythic religion and started thinking and applying logic and linear rational thinking. And now it's moved on to green pluralistic and integral. These are no individual created these states of evolution. They're happening collectively. And what I appreciate about the prison metaphor is there's definitely the inner work that every prisoner has to do for themselves that nobody can do for us. But there's no question that that prisoner is impacted by the world around him. No matter how much Ray did for his own freedom, he definitely made his life better because the guards really started to see who he really was. They would take him into the kitchen, he would cook the meals, he'd have conversation. He was suddenly let out of his 5x7 cell and was given more freedom than a lot of the other prisoners, but still, it was still contained within this very rigid, limited world. Because we are creating heaven on earth, it's not just what we do individually, it's what we do collectively. We want to create and shift systems that reflect the good of all. There is a vision that so many people in the spiritually progressive world talk about. We are here to create a world that works for everybody. And what they're really talking about is to have systems and structures that serve the inherent justice that already exists. For instance, tomorrow morning, I believe it's 11 a.m. El Paso time. I should have double-checked it before I got here this morning. I read it, but it was a couple days ago. Reverend William Barber and 400 faith leaders are going to be at the immigration refugee centers. All these faith leaders coming together and saying, the system has to change. We have to treat these beautiful beings as beautiful beings of light and love and not as prisoners and not taking children. And just all the horrors we have seen. We have a group of Centers for Spiritual Living ministers who will be participating in that, and they're inviting all of us to join them in prayer work. But this is what we have to know. This is our work when they say in joining us in prayer. We are not praying hoping to get something from the system that doesn't already exist. So just as we are doing the always already enlightened being from ourselves, what we hold is that behind this cruel treatment, we see behind what's happening in form In the invisible, in spirit, is the perfection of a justice system that respects and values all human beings, that loves and treats all people equally, that is able to parcel out fairness and justice that is equal to all, that is kind, that is generous, that is abundant, that is good, that already exists. We are not creating a system that in the mind of God doesn't already exist. So we start from that always already enlightened self, that place where it's already good in the invisible, and when we stand in that and then speak our word and take our actions, we are moving into a flow of the entire universe saying, yes, it's already here and everything is for us. So we're not trying to grasp something that doesn't exist and trying to make it happen. Because what happens is we end up reaching for it over and over and over again. It's constantly that carrot. I remember watching a guy run the Boston Marathon. He had a hat on with a big string and a carrot in front of him, so he's chasing the carrot the whole time. It's cracked me up. That's what we're doing. But we already have the carrot spiritually. That's our spiritual work. If we're going to create heaven on earth, we have to know that already exists, and we do all our work from that place in consciousness. And that has to become real to us, that it's not just words, and that's why we do our spiritual practices, not just individually every day, but collectively as a community. We have so many various things happening in our community. Our meditations on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, Diane's thing, all our incredible workshops on Sunday afternoons. All of these are to expand and deepen our consciousness so it's real, so it becomes more real to us than the chairs in which we are sitting. I think of Father Arseny. Never had to say his name out loud before. I don't know if I said that correctly. He's Russian. He was an architect, and then he became a priest. And it was in a time that was very constrictive. The systems were very not for freedom. So he ultimately was sent to Siberia for his work for justice. And he spent 19 years there, and the entire 19 years there, he's doing his ministry. He's working on helping people free, because it wasn't based on where he was, conditions or circumstance. He knew his freedom. And how much did he know his freedom? See, is it too good to be true to know it here and now? At one point, he's helping a young man, and the soldiers are done with this prisoner priest. So they throw him and this young man into a cell. We're in Siberia. It's 30 degrees below zero, and it's for 48 hours. So basically, it's just another form of the death chamber. We're going to put them in, and 48 hours, we'll come back, and we'll have 2 frozen bodies, easy to transport. The moment they get put in that cell, Father Arseny, who has led his whole life doing prayer work, doing spiritual practices, knowing his always already enlightenment, regardless of it's still not yet happening externally, but he's doing his work all the time. He and this young man are thrown into this prison. He just starts praying. He just goes right into all his prayers that he's never left. And as he's praying, the young guy's like, "What are you doing? Let's try to keep warm." And he's just praying. And as he's praying, the whole room fills with light, and other beings from the other side of the veil come, and they're joining him in this prayer. And the prisoner, he's now joining in prayer. And they're having like this eternal church service where they're warm, where they're in bliss, where they're in love. They know they're already in this vast consciousness far beyond the walls of this world. 48 hours later, the guards open the door, the light disappears, the beings from the other side of the veil leave, and the guards are completely startled to find 2 living, smiling human beings looking back at them. It's not too good to be true now. That always already enlightenment already exists. It's a reality. And when we start standing and absolutely being unrelenting and saying, this is more true than all the stories that people are telling me, one of the things I've been thinking about, and perhaps you have been too, and I'm not coming to any conclusion about this, I'm just holding it in my awareness and in my prayer work. A lot of how I feel about what's happening culturally in our world comes from social media. And I see a lot of divisiveness. I see people with very differing perspectives, and I see a lot of anger and violence on both perspectives. Anger at how could anyone be so moronic to believe such horrible, idiotic things. And I'm thinking, 220 is election year. That's going to be intense. Like whatever it is now, is that going to really intensify like even more? And so I've really been with, how do I want to be with all of this? How do I want to be? I definitely have my perspectives. I'm not so transcendent. I definitely have my perspectives about values that I believe, systems that need to change, and values that need to be expressed for there to be the good of all beings, so that those possibilities are true for everybody. But do I want to hate people who don't see or understand what I'm saying or feeling? Do I want to attack them and tell them how evil they are? It doesn't really reside well with me. Because I know many of these people personally, and they're not bad people. It's just maybe not understanding in the way that I understand. How are we going to be, when we're talking about total and ultimate freedom, we're always already enlightened, how are we going to be as this culture is going, I think, moving into a very difficult stage? We're not at the end of it. I think we're moving into a more intensified version of it month by month as we get closer and closer to elections. The only place I know to start is that everybody's always already enlightened. That's the only place. I don't know where I'm going to go with that. I don't know what actions and verb and language and the way I'm going to show up yet in form. I'm still being with that, but the one thing I've really gotten clear on is I just cannot be moved from the fact that the divine presence is in everybody, that I refuse to hate anybody. They may not agree with me. I may feel like their perspective comes from a greater sense of ignorance or not seeing, but they are still the divine beings. And behind that is the always already enlightened self. And the places where I don't understand, where I'm ignorant, I hold that there is a place within me that is always already enlightened. And that always already enlightened self is for everybody. One of the most beautiful things to read about every mystic that I've been reading, Shunryu Suzuki, Yogananda, Ramana Maharshi, Julian of Norwich, the monks on Mount Athos, all of them, Sri Aurobindo, all of them say the same thing. Ultimately, we're all going to be free. Every one of us, not just some people, not just the good people, not just the people who believe this and the people, every one of us is ultimately going to be free. So my job needs to start there. That ultimately we're all going to be fully enlightened, wanting the good for everybody, not just for some people. We want the highest possibility right now to see that it already exists in the mind of God. That is the place where I have to stay anchored in every single day. Is it too good to be true? No, it already is true. It already is true, and that's where we start from. And so that is the invitation, is to start from the awareness that it's already true, that we are all already free, we are all already enlightened, we are all infinitely loving, joyous, free, beautiful, harmonious, abundance, good beings of light and love. That all conditions and circumstances and systemic creations on earth, behind all of them is the infinite good of systems. There's infinite justice and truth and mercy. That all of that already exists now. And it's for every one of us as we claim and accept it for ourselves individually and for all beings. Let's pray. And we begin with the awareness that we are not freedom finders. We are just freedom itself. It already exists. We don't need to go out seeking for it, reaching for it, striving for it, hoping to get it, hoping it's true. It already exists. Divine presence, pure spirit is unlimited. Where there is no limitation, there is no suffering. It is unlimited, infinite beingness. It transcends all time and space. Every condition, every circumstance, every limitation never touches the infinite eternal nowness, the infinite eternal beingness, the infinite eternal presence of pure spirit. It is always whole, perfect, and complete. It is always love. It is always joy. It is always freedom. It is always justice and goodness and kindness. It is always this. And I am so grateful to know that all form was originally birthed innocently and purely from this always already goodness, love, harmony, peace, joy. That each and every aspect of creation, all aspects of creation, from the galaxies upon galaxies upon galaxies to every minutiae, microscopic atom and cell of the universe, is created in the image and likeness of wholeness and perfection, of love and peace and joy, of justice, of freedom, of unlimited good. That each and every one of us individually and collectively is created in, through, and as this infinite love, light, joy, freedom, beyond our wildest imagination in this human world. It exists far beyond what our human minds can conceive, and yet it includes all that our human minds can conceive and our human hearts and our human bodies experience. It is all life now. There is no separation. It is what we call non-dual. There is no separation where it stops and something else begins. Everything is one now. Right in this moment, it is all one now. We are each other. We are the plants. We are the animals. We are the sky. We are this floor. We are the chairs. We are everything now. There is no separation ever, and we include everything beyond what we can compartmentalize in our conceptual life. We let it all go and just say now. Heaven is now. It exists now. And today, we claim that we are the vehicles of that heaven consciousness now on earth, in earth, through and as our own individual awarenesses. That our consciousness is heaven on earth as it is pouring forth through that beautiful crown chakra into every aspect of our body temple, into every aspect of creation. We allow the light to shine and to know its wholeness, its peace, its creativity, its abundance, its joy, its unlimited good in, through, and as all life. Nothing can ever limit this consciousness. We are that unlimited consciousness now, and we are saying yes to it being revealed day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, decade by decade, century by century. It is heaven on earth. It is never limited by time. It is never limited by space. Ever. We are it now. We have claimed it. We accept it. And as we claim and accept this for our own individual consciousness, we claim and accept this for all the collective consciousness. Those systems that have been created from a limited consciousness are now willing and open to shift, to being open to create a system of justice and mercy for all beings. That we let go of the fear of separation, of otherness, and we allow the infinite goodness. There's more than enough for all beings everywhere, all of the time. We stand in this and we know in this. We join all the 400 faith leaders and more tomorrow as they stand for these systems to be open, to become greater and greater lights of truth and of wisdom and of generosity and of freedom and of justice than ever before. We stand with them. No one can do this journey alone, and we are in it all together as one here and now. And this prayer today is limitless, it is timeless, and it is spaceless, and it is fulfilled right now in this moment as us. To God be the glory. To God be the glory. We release this word now into the infinite law of life, knowing that as it has been claimed, accepted, and known here today, it is done. And I invite us all to say together now, and so it is, and so it is. Amen.